I'm Anna.
And I'm Kent.
And this is Film and Family, a podcast about feature filmmaking for professionals in the film industry with families. Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in.
Okay, today's episode, we want to talk about make like nobody's watching and how to create art that matters in a media-saturated world. So this idea of make like nobody's watching first came to my mind. I went to a festival and Richard Dutcher is a film director who was there. And he said something, I think what he actually said was, you should make films like it's the last film you'll ever do. Every film you should treat that way, which I really liked. And the more I thought about it, though, what was even more effective for me was to think about making films like nobody is going to watch them except for me. And maybe you could combine them and say, like, I'm going to make this as though I'm the only one who's going to watch it and it's the last film I'm ever going to make. I don't know. To me, that puts a lot of pressure on. But if I'm the only one going to watch it, it kind of changes the way I approach filmmaking. What do you think changes if we make films this way?
Well, it's interesting. I know this is something that really resonates for you, so I'd like to talk about it with you. I don't know if I think of films quite that way, not naturally at least. I could. I usually think of it much more in terms of audience. I really do. I think about not so much that I'm trying to pander to a general audience or anything like that. I think a lot about like how I'm communicating, if a certain juxtaposition of shots is going to get the emotion or the idea across that I want. I think in terms of testing, maybe not typical Hollywood audience testing, but in terms of just lots of feedback and getting people's perspectives and seeing if I'm communicating. So it's very much a different way of thinking about film for me. But I think the value in this perspective that you are sharing is probably my weak spot as a filmmaker, which is I really admire filmmakers that make stuff that is either autobiographical or in some way extremely personal. I know that Lady Bird was mostly autobiographical. Well, I mean, at least somewhat in a lot of ways. Seems like she was trying to make a film that was very autobiographical. And I think,
Yeah, she said that.
yeah, and that script for me would be hard to write and feel like it was doing anything. It does do a lot. It's very much sort of this quotidian space that she's trying to make films in, which I don't mind, but it's hard for me to be like, does this have a powerful enough dramatic arc? Is there anything visual that's like a real standout moment in the film? But like, it's not really that kind of movie. It's not like looking for the pizzazz and stuff. And I struggle with that. Could I make something really about my own life? But there are things in my life that I think are significant and very personal and that are deeply meaningful to me that I might not feel like I could make a film about because I don't think in these terms. Even movies like The Farewell, also very autobiographical by Lulu Wang. I love that movie. It's so good. It's extremely autobiographical. It's almost based on a true story. It's so autobiographical. And once again, I feel like I would not, like, how do you make a movie about something like that? Like you went through, I think Lulu Wang's movie, if I were just to hear that idea pitched to me, I'd be like, yeah, that's really cool. But that's because it didn't happen to me. But if I were to try and pitch something that was like extremely autobiographical for me to myself, I think I'd just be like, yeah, well, no one's going to want to watch that, you know?
I don't think it has to be autobiographical to make like no one's watching. It's just, what is it that you want to watch? And I guess I think about it like also in terms of audience, but that I am the first audience.
I guess, but my point is that let's say that a guy named Sam Christopher made a movie that was, him just trying to express some ideas about himself and his life. And I watched it and I felt like it was an autobiography, as if I had made an autobiography. And I would probably be stunned and amazed and think that this guy was being so personal, and he had to be so personal to make such a film because it was so striking and personal for me, which I think is what you experienced when you watched movies like La La Land, which, not that you break out into song and dance and stuff, but like sort of some of the experiences that you had and even some of the scripts that you had tried to write were so close to that you'd felt like, at least this is my impression based on what you've expressed to me, that was like watching someone who just seemed to know you. And then you watched First Man and you were like, Damien Chazelle gets me, like this, like there's something so personal that he's gone through that seems like it's making this deep connection with you. And I guess I love it when that happens. So I would make that movie if I was the one who was going to watch it. I would like to see something deeply personal that I say, wow, I went through almost that exact same thing. I super relate to these characters and this experience. I have a friend who feels deeply like he can relate to the family in Tree of Life. And I remember thinking of him the first time I'd seen the movie. I was like, that's just like my friend and his dad and their relationship and that general family dynamic and the mom and everything and the younger brother. It was very much something I felt like I thought of him when I watched it. And then like a couple years later, he was like, I watched this movie that was really impactful for me. It was like watching my family and myself on screen. So yeah, I would make, I think, good movies if I did this. There's a part of me that struggles.
Well, I think a part of all of us struggles when we are sharing something. We're not sure if other people will understand it. And I think about, Damien Chazelle, even where he shared something personal that a lot of people didn't understand. I think a lot of people came away from the ending of La La Land and didn't like it.
It was polarizing, but a lot of people loved it.
A lot of people loved it, but a lot of people didn't like it. And that's kind of what happens when you share something that not everyone's going to understand what you're saying.
Yeah, you talk a lot about this idea in your coaching when you mention letting people be wrong about you.
Yeah.
I know that Jody Moore's talked a lot about that. And it's this idea of when you are willing to be extremely personal and stand for certain values or share certain personal experiences that might be hard to share or everyone might not accept, you'll also connect with people deeply in ways that you couldn't otherwise. And it creates this tight, sort of connected audience.
So. Yeah, it's hard to do, though. It's not easy to be vulnerable. And I think that's where it can almost feel like a safe space if you think I'm just making this movie for me, like only for me to watch. Damien Chazelle said that actually about his first script that he wrote with Whiplash, that was deeply personal for him.
Yeah, not his first script.
Not maybe the first ever that he wrote, but he wrote that one just for him. Yeah. He wasn't planning on making it. He said, I hid it away in a drawer. I didn't want to share it because everyone who knew me would say, well, you're just writing about yourself. But in the end, he pulled that out and that launched his career.
Well, he said that's become his new litmus test almost, where he's like, if I'm writing something and you're like, oh, if I make this, all my friends are going to make fun of me and say I just wrote this movie all about stuff I went through. And he's like, if I start to feel myself thinking that, all my friends are all going to make fun of me when they watch this because they'll know that I'm writing about, I'm drawing upon so much personal stuff. He's like, that's a good sign that it's probably something I need to write. And that's something that my friend Ian Hawks, who's also a great writer working in Utah right now, shared with me that he actually heard from Damien Chazelle firsthand, essentially in a sort of a question panel.
Anyway, so it's kind of this interesting thing where we want everyone to be watching, but if you make films that way, you probably won't get personal because you're thinking about everyone watching and judging it.
What's the coolest, neat, fun, smart thing I can do that everyone will think is awesome and they will all approve of me and love it? We
kind of want to show off when we feel like everyone's watching us or in the spotlight.
It's not a good attitude, I think, to come from when you're trying to create something powerful.
But the irony is, if you can make something as though nobody's watching, I think you're more likely to get people watching because you're sharing something that they haven't seen before or that they relate to deeply. And at this particular festival where I met Richard Dutcher and heard that from him, that was my biggest takeaway. We had a short film that was showing in the festival, and watching it in front of an audience is always interesting. But as I watched it, I felt like we were pandering too much to the audience. Like I wished I'd treated them like a more intelligent audience because I felt like I was trying to make sure they understood. And even doing that, there were some people who still didn't completely understand it.
That's somewhat just a case of learning.
Or naivete.
Trial and error, like I watched it and I was like, I tell so many people about this, but I'm just like, it's really a sign that small technical hiccups can really teach you a lot about if you don't have a sufficient diopter on an anamorphic lens that has a minimum focus distance of like 3 yards, it's really hard to do a close-up on a pregnancy test and see what the result of it is, and that's really important to the plot. It's like you can't get the lens close enough, and so you've got to find solutions to that, which I think didn't take enough time to do, and we tried to punch in digitally, but it still wasn't quite enough, and so we just left it on the shot for a really long time. So it's like, you can see that, right? It's positive, but then by then it starts to feel kind of dumb, like you're treating the audience like they're dumb. So yeah, there's lots of things there that we were sort of realizing, these are all these things. And you're right that it doesn't feel like a movie that, at least you and I, in our personal judgments of our own work, felt like it was something that wasn't treating the audience like it was extremely intelligent.
Well, and some
It's
of
a hard balance to strike.
Yeah, some of it was our own fault, like we weren't being clear enough. There were some parts that I felt as I watched it, they get it. We can move on.
Yeah, we can
like
cut now.
I was kind of holding on, like, what if they're, looking at their neighbor and they miss this and then they don't understand the whole thing. And as I watched it, I'm like, I can treat them like they're more intelligent than that. And if I'm the one watching it, I'm definitely not going to put in fluff, because I don't like sitting through that. And so I'm not going to pander to my audience. I'm going to treat them as intellectuals. And so I think it would help me do that more personally.
It's probably a good assumption to make. I mean, all audience members are intellectuals the moment they sit down in a dark theater. It's been proven time and again that their IQs like triple the moment they collectively sit down in a dark space. They become very, very smart, and they can pick out every single tiny little thing you've done wrong. So,
well, and unlike a real life situation, when someone sits down and they kind of turn off all their other senses and just tune in to exactly what they're watching, which isn't always how people watch, but in an ideal viewing experience, it makes sense that we're constantly getting so much sensory input in real life that we have to sort through. We don't notice a lot of things, but when you're being shown just a limited field of view in a dark theater with no other distractions, you're going to see a lot more. So anyway, I like that perspective. Most of my favorite films, not everyone will like it, I'll just say that, but those who do like it, I think will like it more.
Like what?
What we make when it's personal.
Oh yeah. I mean, you'll never make a film that everyone likes. Think about the most popular movies in history have tons of people that don't like them. Think about how many people don't like Gone with the Wind and how poorly it's aged politically and socially. Think about how many people don't like the Marvel movies. There are tons, by the way. I mean, they are super popular and people generally like them, but a lot of people don't, Well,
and it's just personal preference, I think. For me, I don't love films that try to appeal to mass audiences. I feel like they usually are.
Sometimes. There's some movies that we've watched that appeal to mass audiences that we really enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to rule out all movies that appeal to mass audiences, but I feel like most of my favorites tend to be polarizing because some people don't relate to them or don't understand them, and then some people do on a deeper level.
Yeah. La La Land was one example, which had a huge audience, but it did definitely. I have very few films that I've tried to mention to people that I've heard just do not like it. A lot of people just did not like that movie. And Joe Wright, I know his Anna Karenina had a pretty polarizing effect on a lot of people. A lot of people disliked it, and we loved that movie. But those are often movies that can be powerful. Either it deeply connects with someone or it shakes someone up and it challenges their paradigms in a healthy way, hopefully responsible way. So it's exciting filmmaking to think about when you think of it that way, that it can deeply connect with some people who might not feel understood, in that way. And it can also help other people grow in a way that might be uncomfortable for them, but hey, filmmaking shouldn't always be easy and comfortable. Film viewing shouldn't necessarily have to be that thing, that easy sort of, you have here, you call it vanilla filmmaking.
Yeah, I guess I just think about, that phrase about vanilla ice cream, that pretty much everyone likes it, but it's usually not your favorite flavor. It's like vanilla, kind of bland. It's an okay flavor. It's good. I like it, especially with a brownie or something. But my favorite flavor of ice cream is going to be something a lot more unique with a lot more of its own flavor that probably not everyone likes. Yeah, but that's okay.
Like peach mint or something.
Yeah, something. Cinnamon, I think sounds good right now. Cinnamon ice cream.
Cinnamon.
Like a red cinnamon.
I don't know. I mint. I just feel like throwing that into every flavor makes it weird. I was trying to think of something
I
polarizing.
like mint.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't. So now we're 50-50.
So yeah, I guess I'm not as interested in making something that appeals to more people, but it's less exciting. I'd rather make something that appeals to less people, but the people who like it,
Yeah,
it deeply.
something that a million people think is, yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Like that's actually my greatest fear when I pitch to people, when I pitch to anyone. I feel like if I pitch a movie idea and they go, yeah, I kind of like it, I'm like, oh shoot, it's terrible. Like if someone loves it deeply, is like, wow, this was powerful, like I want to do this movie, then it's like, oh, that's great. But even if someone reads it and they're like, I am so upset at reading this and I hate it, I don't always feel bad about that. Now,
Yeah.
I have to ask them why. And if the reason why is that they're just like, how could this thing happen? It's so sad. I'm like, oh, great. They deeply emotionally connected with the story and the character, and they're really sad about what happened to that character, which is probably my intention. Unless it wasn't, then I might be in trouble. But like, I've had that experience, and that's actually exciting for me when people have really strong reactions in both directions. It helps me know that something's happening.
You're really
It's
saying
valuable.
something, yeah, that people are responding to strongly one way or the other. So let's take it back to the other thing we mentioned. How do you stand out and create art that matters in a media saturated world?
Yeah, stand out is kind of a punky sounding phrase, but creating art that matters in a media saturated world, I guess all you have to do to create art that matters in a media saturated world is create art that, matters, at least to you. And whatever matters means, right? That's kind of an opinion, I suppose. But creating art that stands out, I think goes back to this idea of make like nobody's watching. It's, or that you're going to be the only one that watches it. When it's deeply personal, it can cut through the sort of neutral, bland, flat line of mass media that is just not really doing anything unique or connecting with anyone. Maybe it's connecting with everyone in a tiny way, but it's not connecting with anyone in a deep, deep way, And so these are generalized terms, but I think that today's world is a very big populated planet. We have a lot of people on the earth, and they're very, very connected in ways that have never existed in the history of the world. And I feel like that has opened up, we've seen this happen on YouTube, this remarkable opportunity that we have to connect with people and create these sort of international communities that bridge basically every known demographic, to create groups of people that identify with very singular traits, And so it might just be like, wow, a YouTube channel all about what it feels like to be really tall, like taller than 6'6", and like all the unique experiences that happen, for people like that. And yet you never would have ever seen a Hollywood movie made about that in a way that's like, oh, I'm going to connect with all those people that are over 6'6". Like if that was your target market, like you'd have a lot of sweaty studio executives, but you can find those audiences nowadays. And I think that even in film, like feature filmmaking, you can do that and eventually find people that resonate with what you're doing. And then you'll eventually start finding people that are even outside of that target niche or whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be a very pointed niche or a target market. It could just be, this is something I would really feel deeply personal about. And I believe on faith that there are lots of other people that do too. And I think it's always true.
Yeah.
If you manage to deeply communicate that personal part of yourself in an effective way, which is very hard. So you actually have to be a good artist. You have to be a great craftsman. But if you do that, the personal nature of the subject matter or the narrative is not going to be what holds you back. It's your craftsmanship. So if you can do both of those things, then you will. I believe anyone can make something like that, and they will connect with other people, for better or for worse, that share those feelings and ideas and experiences and feelings. I said twice. Anyway.
Yeah, I think about Austin Kleon. I love his books. He has in his book Steal Like an Artist, he talks about personal style and how it's not very helpful to try to create your own personal style and say, I'm going to limit myself to this kind of thing that I do. He said, your style will naturally evolve because all of the things that you like that are unique to you have you as a common denominator. Like you are the common denominator. And, you know, when Damien Chazelle was pitching La La Land, they said, you should probably make Ryan Gosling's character like a wannabe guitarist in
Like
a
a
rock
rock
and roll
star.
band.
Yeah, he could
Like
be a
more
rock.
people will relate to that.
They were
And
trying to broaden.
yeah, they're
like,
trying to spread it thin, but then it's less interesting. And
how many movies have we seen about aspiring rock and roll artists?
right.
And like the idea of like a jazz pianist
And there's some
actually
good
resonated
ones.
with me because I was a huge jazz fan as a teenager. I'm a millennial. They probably didn't think there were that many of us out there, but I think there are. I think there are a lot of us that love jazz and love not just vocal jazz like Michael Bublé, but like straight up Miles Davis, you know, Oscar Peterson, and that kind of challenging, earth-shattering sort of jazz. And like that was cool for me to watch and identify with. And he himself, Chazelle, said that he really identified as a young teenager with That Thing You Do by Tom Hanks because it starred a drummer who played in a rock band, but the drummer actually loved jazz. That's what he actually liked playing in his basement. And he was watching a jazz drummer in a movie as a protagonist was like this deeply unique experience for me that I'd never seen on the screen ever before. And then he made Whiplash, right? And so, and that just because Damien Chazelle played jazz drums. And so I just think that's really fascinating that, and then he put Tom Everett Scott in La La Land.
Yeah.
And so anyway.
Just keeping it personal, but he could get behind that. That was something he felt strongly about. And I think that even I'm not a person who was super into jazz, but I am more into it now because of your love of it and his passion for it. I think
you like jazz now.
Yeah, I like jazz.
If you haven't seen La La Land, you have no idea why that's funny. Anyway, so go watch it and you'll know why it's so great or why you hate it so much.
Yeah. So the other thing that I just want to mention before I forget that came to mind about how to make art that matters or that's meaningful. I think first of all, it has to be meaningful to you. You know, it's hard to make a film and not feel like it's meaningful to you and have it be meaningful to anyone else. Hopefully, if it's going to transmit any meaningfulness to your audience, it should be 10 times more meaningful to you. And then they'll probably get some degree of that through all the layers that it's going to go through. But I also think that having a meaningful life outside of your film career helps you to make meaningful art. And that's something we talk about a lot, Film and Family, having the balance and what the benefits of balancing a meaningful, thriving personal life with your family or whatever relationships you have with a career as a filmmaker. And I think having both lets you to tell stories about something that's meaningful to you, that's not just, I don't know, like if all you care about is your career, you're just going to make films about that.
Which is probably filmmaking.
Which we've seen a lot of people do.
Now, I'll clarify your point. I feel like it's necessary to clarify that there's no definition for a meaningful life. There's no prescribed actions we're suggesting.
There's not a right or wrong way to do it.
Take. Yeah, like this is the meaningful life and these are the not meaningful things. I have my opinions of what those things are. You'll notice whatever those opinions are because they're what I decide to do with my life, right? And I'm trying to live the most meaningful life that I can. But they're often challenging. They're often, in my opinion, things that might make it appear like filmmaking and a film career might seem harder when you do things that are just more than just filmmaking, when you actually engage in relationships that require time and effort and commitment and financial resources and all these things that we really want to save for our films. But this idea of meaningful is also an opinion, right? And so it's really sometimes I think less to do with living a more meaningful life, although you might have your ideas of what that means for you. And I would suggest that we all pursue that. If we feel like there's something that would help us feel like our life is more meaningful, we should pursue that. But regardless of what we have or haven't done, it's assuming that our life is meaningful, no matter what we have or haven't done. Like even if you spent the last 10 years in your room eating and playing video games, maybe there's something really meaningful that you've learned through that experience. And maybe as you've broken out of your bedroom and discovered the world again, that could be a really meaningful experience, right? Like, my point is, it has maybe more to do with finding the meaning in your life as it is than adding or injecting some sort of objectively meaningfulness into your life, which I say that in quotations because I don't think it exists, this objective meaningfulness. I think our mortal experiences, our lives themselves are objectively meaningful, no matter who you are or what you've experienced or what you've done, they're meaningful. And so digging into that and finding what it means to you, the experiences that you've had or the life that you've lived so far is, I think, going to lead to you feeling like you've lived a more meaningful life, not just in the past, but also right in front of you, your immediate future. And that will, I think, infuse itself naturally once you start to identify what those things are into your work.
Yeah, it's definitely not about your circumstances and changing things around you that are external as much as finding the meaning within those circumstances, whatever they are, which I think is demonstrated beautifully in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about kind of testing this theory that what really drives us is our search for meaning. And that ultimately determines like our survival and our quality of life. And even in Holocaust camps, those who could find meaning in that difficult circumstance, which no one would choose as like, this is the meaningful life that I want. And yet that was a place where he proved that theory and saw that those who did find meaning in those difficult circumstances had a meaningful life, that they could feel motivated to keep going.
Well, yeah,
Or
and purpose. They could feel purpose in their experiences, even though those experiences seemed meaningless. Certainly, the suffering and the violence seemed meaningless. And he makes that case against the sort of the prior theories of the day, and even of this day, that people live for and are motivated by money or sex or power or influence over other people. That these are the key motivating forces, or survival is a big one, that people are mainly motivated by survival. I think he basically says the concentration camps proved all of those things wrong. Like, none of those things were sufficient to keep people alive, even survival, even the will to survive. He said the number one thing is, if you can maintain your will to meaning, you can maintain your will to everything else, including survive. And so I think that's important. There's meaning in parenthood, I think, but there's also meaning in infertility, and there's meaning in singlehood. There's meaning in teen pregnancy. There's meaning in miscarriage. There's meaning. You see how this is all kind of the same topic, and they're all vastly different experiences, but they're all meaningful. It's up to us to find what those meanings are. And I think that's why millions and billions of people are still driven to both consume story like never before and to create and tell stories like never before. And there seems to be the inundation of supplies. This is a media saturated world, but the demand doesn't seem to be letting up. The more media there is, the demand is still high. People want to feel like their lives are meaningful, and that's what they're looking for. And so as artists, as creators and tellers of story, when we do tell things that are deeply personal, we're finding a few people out there that might be able to watch our movies, experience the stories that we have to tell, and say, oh my gosh, I never understood the meaning of that experience that I've had until I watched it up there on the screen and experienced it in that way.
And in that way, art can change lives by giving meaning to the experiences that we've had, giving us greater understanding of each other's experiences. And I think that's why it has survived since the beginning of time. We find cave drawings, and art has always existed. Instruments have always existed. People find ways to share meaning. And even during the Great Depression or difficult times, there have always been people needing art even more to make meaning of those circumstances. So yeah, meaningful life helps you make meaningful media, finding the meaning in your own life. I guess the one last thing I'd like to address before we wrap this up is just, we've talked about people pleasing a little bit, making like no one's watching instead of trying to make what you think other people will like. So we've talked about that in art, but I want to talk about how that applies in general. to our relationships and our life. I think that many of us have been socialized and conditioned to choose other people's happiness over our own, or as a way of creating our own happiness. I think especially the messages young women receive are often focused more on their being desirable than on owning and pursuing their desires. So they are being the object of desire, and men are often portrayed as the owners or givers of desire. But I also think this shows up in lots of places. Like we say to our kid about our kids, as long as they're happy, I'm happy, right? Which sounds like such a nice thing to say, but most people are not happy when they believe that or subscribe to that.
Or
And then
they make their happiness so dependent on their kids that they then blame their kids for their unhappiness because they
exactly,
can't make their kids happy.
exactly.
Dang it.
And even men receive messages like this, happy wife, happy life is another
Right.
example. So what is the problem with this way of thinking?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
There's no problem at all. We cannot make other people happy. We can't make them happy. You can't just force them into happiness. And so we definitely can help them feel happy. And I do believe in the pursuit of other people's happiness over our own in terms of serving others and turning outward and blessing others. That is a happy way to live. And it is a meaningful way to live. It's easy to find meaning in that, is what I mean to say. So I subscribe to all those ideas. However, this idea of I'm not going to let myself feel happy if everyone else around me is sad, or if my kids are crying, I need to feel upset. If my wife disapproves of something I'm doing, I am going to either, stop everything and convince her that she's wrong, or just subscribe to whatever it is she believes about me. You might have something you feel you need to do that your wife, I'm saying this in response to your idiom, but it could be your spouse, I'm not just talking about men, that your spouse disagrees with. You might feel like it's something that is important for you to do. And there are some things I'm even now in my life sort of realizing, I think I need to just do this thing. And I've always not done it because I'm worried that, you won't like it. And I've realized, like, there are selfish things and there are things that maybe aren't appropriate, right? I'm not talking about that kind of a thing, but I'm just talking about simple stuff. I'll give an example. I'll get personal. I just went on a run by myself, maybe for the first time in years, because we've made this really wonderful marital tradition of ours to run together. And I really love it, but you are exceptionally exhausted these days. And I sometimes want to run harder. And I am allowing myself to feel resentment because I feel like it's your fault that I'm not running as hard as I could possibly run and getting the workout that I feel like I have needed. And yet I felt that if I ran on my own, that I'd somehow be doing something bad. I don't know, I'd be breaking some sort of rule or some sort of tradition or ruining something. I don't know. And so it took me a minute, and I talked to you about it. And I think you were like, yeah, I've always told you you can just run on your own and run harder if you want to. And I think it's kind of liberated me a little bit. It seems silly, maybe even listening to it, but it felt real. Like I couldn't do it. Like I was deciding things. I was making decisions based on what I thought you would think, not based on what I felt I needed. Whereas if I was fully individualized as a human being and making my own decisions for myself as an adult, I would just go run and get a workout when I have a moment. And it's not like that's never going to happen. Like that moment, I mean, that opportunity, and or that that's a bad thing or that that's going to ruin our marriage. And so I still love running together, and that can still happen. But I don't know. I think that I often like to just do everything. We often like to do everything together, but at the same time, like if I feel like I need to do something, I need to do it. And if I need to, work a few hours in the evening after the kids go to bed, I need to do that. I need to just decide for myself what my life is going to look like. I want my family to be a big part of that, but sometimes that just means doing some things on my own every now and then. So
yeah, and this is something we recently talked about, and I was like, yeah, I'm glad you're being
I
honest about
I was wrong.
this.
I was wrong. Yeah, like you weren't mad about it at all, but I was making the decision based on my assumption of your reaction.
I think I would rather you feel like you can own your choices than blame me for them if you're not happy about the way it's going. And I think for me, the big breakthrough I had in this people pleasing region of my life was when I actually first started listening to Jody Moore, who was my first life coach. And she used to have this intro to her podcast that said something like, the best gift that you can give your children is a happy, healthy, thriving mother. And I remember thinking about that idea a lot, and that kind of changed my paradigm. I started to realize that if I was expecting my children being happy to make me happy, then I would try to control them so that I could feel better. Or, like you said, blame them or feel resentment if I'm not feeling happy, because I say, it's your fault because I'm giving them this power that they don't want.
I'm doing everything for you and you guys are ungrateful and not happy and blah, blah, blah. But if it's just like, yeah, I did this thing, I gave this to you, and now I'm going to take care of myself and sleep and exercise and eat, and you can decide what you want to do with this food, if you want to throw it on the ground or throw a fit or whatever. That's really up to you. I feel bad for you. I think it's quite good. It's like, you own it. You own your own life and your own emotions in that way.
Yeah. So I think the problem with people pleasing is, first of all, half the time we're wrong about what other people think. And if we spend a lot of time worrying about what they think or what we think that they think, it gets very exhausting, and we're often wrong. We don't really know what people are thinking. And even if they say words, they might not necessarily think that. And so that's a lot of guesswork. And then we're basing our emotions on someone else's mood or someone else's perceived thoughts that we think that they have, when we can just decide to feel happy or to feel however we want to feel without someone giving us permission or someone liking us. We can like ourselves without someone else agreeing, or we can like what we make even if we think other people might not like it. So I just think that that's a way of having integrity and being true to ourselves, being honest.
Yeah, it's hard to do that.
Yeah.
And I think we all do people please quite a lot. We make decisions based on what we think other people will think or do, or what they might actually think, or what they might have even told us, but like making decisions based on what other people say or do and who that person is in our lives kind of robs us of the ability to make choices based on our deep sort of principles, whatever is deeply meaningful to us and the way we feel like our life needs to go. And it just reminds me of, Isaiah says, "Cease from man whose breath is in his nostrils." This idea that, like, why are you going to base your whole life around the thoughts or opinions or decisions of someone else who might not even outlive you? like they might be dead before you finish living your life, or they're this very mortal thing. Even if you were born on the same day as this person, you die on the same day as this person. It's like, they're not going to be the ones to determine your legacy. You've got to be the person who determines what you leave behind on this earth. And so you've got to make decisions based on things that you feel like are eternal principles, principles that feel right and true to you, that you feel like you got to live your life the way you truly feel is right. And, obviously there's a myriad number of opinions and ethical and moral perspectives on this earth, but doing something for the wrong, even if it feels like the right reason, if doing it for someone else, it will eventually lead to feeling like you're living this hollow life, I think. And even if you're wrong, even if you say, like, this is what I feel like I need to do, and you do it and it actually is a big mistake, at least you owned that decision, and then you can see the mistake for exactly what it is, and you can
blame
learn
it on anyone.
Yeah, you can't blame it on anyone, and you can decide exactly what you're going to do about that mistake. And I think this is why we also shouldn't try and control other people's lives, because we need to let our children and our spouses and our whoever's know that, hey, you've got 100% agency and control over your life, and you shouldn't do anything because of me. I'll tell you what I think, my advice. Hopefully that helps you, offers you a perspective, but you don't have to do what I tell you to do, because then you'll say that you did that because of me, and you won't own the decision. And if you don't own it, you can't really learn from it. And that's really what this life's all about, is moving through experiences and decisions and learning and growing. Even if we make big mistakes and some dumb decisions, we've just got to do it and own it. And so sometimes we make movies and we own them and we just do it. We make huge mistakes. People sometimes warn us against stuff and we still make those mistakes, but guess what? We can own it, and we learn a lot, and we learn fast because we're not just making movies for people that we think, oh, isn't this the thing that everyone loves? Like, shouldn't we just make cool movies with special effects and superheroes and I don't know what? Everyone has their different things that they think are objective truth as to what makes movies universally likable, but those are all just opinions based on movies that you've watched that you like, that you assume everybody else likes. And so maybe it's based on box office ticket results. I don't know. Yeah, we just on all levels really can't just live our lives for other people in that way. I do think we can live our lives for other people from a place of loving other people and serving other people. But one of the best things we can do to serve other people is telling them that they can make their own choices and live their own life, and that we're just going to support them and help them through that. That's an actual love and service, not I'm going to make you happy and you're going to do everything I say because I know it'll be what makes you happiest. That
and also showing up as your true self so that they feel like they also have permission to show up as their true self. And I think it's the same thing as making art. Like we talked about, make like no one's watching. We are also creating our character, creating who we are and who we're becoming. And we should make that like no one's watching, make ourselves into the people we want to be,
live our lives
regardless of what other people think. And I would rather be someone of the kind of character that I want and have people who don't like me and people who really do, than try to be all things to all people and end up being kind of flat and boring. Because already so many people are getting the message that like a certain kind of person is desirable or attractive, or a certain kind of body or a certain kind of personality or certain kind of hobbies are like the desirable thing to do or look like. And I just think that's so boring and so wrong because everyone is unique. And that's what makes it so beautiful, is this diversity that we bring. And that's really letting people know and love you as who you are. If you were pretending to be something you're not, then there's always going to be that part in the back of your brain saying, well, they don't know the real me.
That's actually one of my favorite things about the movie Lady Bird, is that whole paradigm that she's exploring in her autobiographical movie about this teenage girl who like starts to make all of her decisions based on trying to fit in with these popular kids. She gets her heart broken by this guy that she won't break up with because she knows that if she still goes to prom with him, she can still be friends with that other rich girl. She eventually starts to own like, I want to go to the dance and I like this song. Like there's that part where they say, oh, I hate this song. She's like, yeah, I hate it too. And then she stops and says, actually, I love this song. And then she says, can you drop me off at this other person's house if you guys aren't going to go to the dance because I want to go? And they said, who's that? And she says, she's my best friend. She starts to own
herself.
That is that person who's not very popular. She's my best friend. And that song you don't like, I like it. And the you who are really not a very good influence on me or very kind to me, like I don't have to be your friend or be your girlfriend or whatever. And she starts to kind of just figure out like, no, that's part of her growing up, and that movie also explores a lot of interesting mother-daughter themes that are related to this podcast, as we've talked about, sort of unconditional love and trying to control people and what that looks like. And everyone's imperfect and we all make this mistake. And I definitely do this with my own kids who are tiny, trying to control them. And no, but you're doing it so wrong. And like your life would be way better if you just did what I say. That can be hard. And yet we'll figure it out. I can own my parenting and that's sometimes why it's nice to live far away from parents, not because we don't love our parents, because we do, but you kind of have to just figure out how to parent and own it, own all your mistakes and own all your experiences. And super hard, but
and own our own opinions. Like
feels meaningful.
I think with my kids, sometimes I'll say like, nobody likes when you scream right in their ear. I'll say something like that instead of, I don't like it when you scream right in my ear. Like, and I'm kind of teaching, if I do that, I'm kind of teaching them,
don't do that because everyone will dislike you.
Don't do it. If other people don't like it, when really I want them to have strong willpower to be able to do things that they won't be liked for, to say no to things that are bad for them.
Yeah. I really love how you brought this from making films that maybe people will dislike to living a life that maybe people will dislike.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people disliked people who lived incredible lives that changed the world for the better, at least in my opinion. Lives like Gandhi and Jesus Christ and Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Lincoln. Almost exactly all of those people were shot or crucified or killed in some way,
Or
assassinated
martyrs, yeah.
because of what they stood for and the life they lived. And yet these are the people that stand as the most influential, household name, history making people that ever walked the earth, you know? So that's pretty significant. If you want to have influence and reach that is global, you actually probably have a better shot at it by making something that's deeply personal, as opposed to trying to make something that's vanilla, as you call it, or all things to all people, which, yeah, I have deep feelings about that phrase, all things to all people. You cannot be all things to all people, and we should never try to make films that are all things to all people, or to be people that are all things to all people. Like, we need to live for ourselves and for our convictions, and for, in my case, I think about living for God and making those decisions based on what I think he thinks, because he's eternal and his relationship with me is indicative of my relationship with myself. And that doesn't mean I live life selfishly. When I say live for myself or live for yourself, it just means make decisions that you can own and not make them based on how you think other people will think or feel. It's a subtle difference and it can be confusing, but I don't believe in obviously being selfish. I think that's not very good, but I do believe in having that strong will, like you talked about.
And I think that can exist with and be very selfless. If you decide to love somebody,
even if everyone
even
else
if they
hates
don't
them,
like you back, or
or that too,
or
that's even
everyone else
harder.
hates them, you're deciding to love because loving feels good. You're loving for your own sake, and not because you're expecting something in return or because it's the popular thing to do.
But that's not selfish. It sounds selfish almost the way you say it, but like,
sounds like
it's extremely difficult. By doing that, you are deciding to do something extremely vulnerable and uncomfortable and hard.
Yeah.
And no way is that selfish. That is selfless, to love someone and to give love, even if they never accept it or feel it or choose to feel it or give it back. It's a powerful thing to make that kind of a decision. And it usually changes lives. At least it always does, in my opinion, because it'll change yours, because it requires such effort. The depth of character you will receive from that will give you power to love other people that will probably accept it, even if that particular person doesn't, in this hypothetical sort of thing that we're painting. So,
yeah. Well, that concludes our episode for today. I hope that it inspires you to make like no one's watching, whether you're making art or making your character or choosing how you want to treat other people, and that you won't be afraid to stand up for something and be disliked or be different, but be true to yourself.
Yeah, believe in yourself. We should make a movie about that. Well, anyway, thanks for joining us. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, you'll love our weekly email.
Click subscribe in the show notes to stay up to date on the latest opportunities and resources we have available. See you there.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.